V12s are the automotive holy grail, the realm of the elite and the expensive. But do they live up to the hype, or are they just a waste of cylinders? In today's episode, I'm going to find out by driving one of the most ludicrous grand tourers of them all, the Ferrari F12.
Ferrari F12, 6.3 litres, V12, 731 brake horsepower. It's madness. Many things I could tell you, but I think it's all about that V12. I think every other engine is just a bit humdrum, a bit boring. There's just this beautiful cacophony of like whines and just mechanical engine noises. And Ferrari have chosen not to hide that they want you to be very aware of the hard work they've put in. Even if they're trying to build a GT, they can never get away from their racing and their sports car pedigree. Now, I don't have any Ferraris to compare this to, but if they all drive like this one, then I can see why they're so popular. Oh, and listen, blipping on the downshifts, making me sound like a much better driver than I really am. You can really push these things into the corners. The steering is so quick, it's very twitchy and not altogether confidence inspiring when you're first strapping yourself into your first ever Ferrari. I think it's fine whilst driving. Under braking it gets very, very twitchy. That V12 engine, it's never silent. You can never forget it's there. It's so close to you, pushed right back behind the axle. It's sitting right next to me in the passenger seat at all times, roaring, gurgling, snorting, just hellaciously powerful. But you always have to respect it, because the minute you take your eyes off this thing, the minute you fiddle with something else, that's when you're going to get yourself in some serious trouble. A car this wide is naturally going to tramline, so every time you're constantly making little micro corrections, far more than you really expect from a GT car. Now, GT cars are supposed to be cruisers, they're supposed to be able to crush continents, and I don't think this is a GT. What I think it is a super GT, because I think it's a mix of supercar and GT. It's not either of them. It's a combination. And whilst that steering is fidgety, it's also very precise. The brakes are not very confidence inspiring. They're quite bitey, but I think that's not my main problem. My main problem with them is you just don't get any information from them. I don't know what the brakes are doing when I press that brake pedal. And considering this is a very big, very fast, very expensive car, you want to know what the brakes are doing. But so far, that's the only thing I can really call it, call a problem on this car. Everything else is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Positioning this car isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, because it's big in all dimensions. You've got this huge bonnet, which you can't really see a lot of. And so you need to be careful that you're not going to poke out into a junction, which I did when I first started driving this car. This bonnet, it goes out far further than you think, and because you're so far back into the cabin, it can make visibility a little bit challenging in tight maneuvers. I wouldn't want to try this in a drive-through or something like that. I think that'd be quite scary. And these aren't particularly wide country roads. It's certainly manageable. Would like a little bit more space to each lane? Certainly, but I've driven Arctics down roads smaller than this. One thing I probably wouldn't be able to do is get this as a personal car, not because of the cost, but because of just how noisy it is at startup. when you have a Ferrari, you probably have your own house, like, you know, or your own separate house, and maybe you have land and all that sort of stuff. And so a very loud startup noise isn't really going to be a concern. But I think in my little semi-detached house along a residential street, starting this thing up at 4 in the morning would certainly get the curtains twitching. Oh, just listen to those downshifts. When I was first driving this car, I'll admit it, I was terrified. Excited as well, but mostly terrified, because I've never driven a Ferrari, never driven a V12, and I've never driven something with 731 brake horsepower. And so there's a lot of variables to consider, but I'm starting to feel this car. The brakes are starting to feel a little bit better though. Or I'm starting to understand them more, one of the two. But that noise and that engine. Do all V12s sound like this? Do all V12s perform like this? That's something I'm gonna have to figure out. This car is terrifyingly quick, but also it's really comfortable at the same time. Something with this much power and this much comfort doesn't make sense in my brain. It doesn't compute somehow. And whacking it into auto, you can just cruise around. It's no more scary than any other car. And I think that's what's really important in a GT car. You need to be able to have fun in the twisties, but also its main purpose is for crushing continents, for driving hundreds of miles in a day. And I think the only downside, the only thing I think this car lets down a little bit is the road noise is more than I thought it would be for a GT car. Yes, the engine, yes, the exhaust, but there's just a lot of tyre roar as well, and I think that's a bit of a surprise to me. I'm sure you can get used to it, and you know, I'm sure you can forgive a Ferrari many things, so road noise probably isn't too high up the list of people's concerns when they're buying a V12. But again, I just think it's interesting from a GT perspective that I don't know if that road noise would get annoying after a while. Or maybe who cares when you've just got that V12? That's probably it, really, isn't it? No one cares about road noise, Tom. They just want to hear about the V12, and I think you're right. I still can't believe I'm driving a Ferrari. I'm looking in my peripheral vision at the prancing horse. Never something I would think that was going to happen on a Thursday afternoon. A massive shout out to James for being crazy enough to lend out his F12 to someone he's only met a couple of times. Oh, this car. I mean, to be fair, I love all cars, but this has been a very, very special car. If you watched this far, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you consider liking and subscribing. And with that, I'm going to keep driving this Ferrari, and I'll catch you down the road.